Good morning to Dr. Akhlil. Today we will be presenting about notifiable disease in Malaysia. So for group 1 and 2, we will be presenting about definition of notifiable disease, describe related law on mandatory disease notification, and list notifiable disease in Malaysia. So these are the group members of group 1 and 2. Then we will proceed with the definition. So by definition, notifiable disease is an illness that must be reported by healthcare providers to public health authorities as required by law. These diseases are tracked because they may be highly contagious, severe, or occur frequently in the population. So according to World Health Organization, International Health Regulation 2005, student parties must notify WHO of all events which may constitute a public health emergency of international concerns within 24 hours of assessment.
Okay, next I will continue with Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease Act 1988. So this act states that every medical practitioner who treats or become aware of the existence of any infectious disease at any premises shall notify the nearest health officer of the existence of that infectious disease as soon as possible without any delay in the form of prescribed by the regulations made under this act. So this act provides a comprehensive legal framework for Malaysia to respond effectively to infectious disease threats, balancing public health needs with legal safeguards. It has been especially relevant during outbreaks like dengue, HFMD, and COVID-19. So some of the example of sections are Section 6, the declaration of infected area, Section 10, requirement to notify infectious disease, Section 11, declaration of an infected local area, and Section 12, infected persons not to act in a manner likely to spread infectious disease. The minister may, by regulation made under this act, prescribe the measures to be taken to prevent the introduction of any infectious disease into Malaysia from an infected area. This happened during COVID-19, where Malaysia declared the result against China.
Okay, next. Okay, we will proceed to the Prevention and Controls of Infectious Disease Regulations 2020. So it is made under Section 11(2) of Act 342, the Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease Act 1988. It stands enforced during the COVID-19 pandemic to give legal power for movement restrictions, quarantine, and public health measures in areas declared as the infected local areas. It is commonly referred to as the Movement Control Order or MCO regulations. Firstly, is used in March 2020 for Malaysia's COVID-19 MCO. It became a model for future public health emergency regulations. The purpose of it is to prevent the spread of infectious disease by controlling movement, gatherings, and activities in infected areas, especially when outbreaks pose national level threats. The enforcement is enforced by the authorized officer under MOH, Royalty Malaysia Police, the PDRM, and other designated agencies. Next. So for Emergency Essential Powers Ordinance 2021, it is introduced during the COVID-19 pandemic to strengthen government control of infectious diseases. It worked together with Act 342, the Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease Act 1988, and it's allowed the Ministry of Health, MOH, to make reporting, testing, isolation, and vaccination mandatory. It requires all suspected or confirmed COVID-19 cases to be reported immediately to health authorities and help ensures the faster disease notification, better coordination, and effective outbreak control across the Malaysia.
Okay, now I'm going to continue with question 3, which is the list of notifiable diseases. So firstly, we have AIDS. So for AIDS, Notification by phone within 24 hours is not required, but a written notification in 1 week is needed. And then for laboratory confirmation is required. And notification cannot be made by clinical diagnosis alone, and diagnosis status must require a laboratory diagnosis. And next is HIV infection. So for HIV infection, notification by phone within 24 hours is not required, but a written notification in 1 week is required. And for laboratory confirmation, there's no need for laboratory confirmation. And then notification by clinical diagnosis is also not required, but diagnosis status by laboratory diagnosis is required. And for cancroid, you no need to notify by phone in 24 hours, but a written notification in 1 week is required. And laboratory confirmation is not required. And notification cannot be made by clinical diagnosis alone, and diagnosis status must require a laboratory diagnosis. And next, for disease like cholera, dengue fever, DHF, DSS, and diphtheria, for these three, notification by phone is required in 24 hours, but written notification in 1 week is not required. And laboratory confirmation is also required, while notification cannot be made by notification can be made by diagnosis, clinical diagnosis, and diagnosis status can also be made by laboratory diagnosis. Next is dysentery. So for dysentery, there is no need to notify by phone in 24 hours, but a written notification is needed in 1 week. And laboratory confirmation is required, and notification can be made by clinical diagnosis alone, while diagnosis status required a laboratory diagnosis. And for Ebola Marburg disease, so for this disease, notification can be made by 24 hours with phone, while written notification cannot. While written notification is not needed in 1 week. And for laboratory, confirmation is required, and notification can be made by clinical diagnosis alone, while diagnosis status also required a laboratory diagnosis. And for food poisoning, so for food poisoning, notification is required within phone in 24 hours, while written notification in 1 week is not required. And laboratory confirmation also not required, and notification can be made by clinical diagnosis alone, while diagnosis status does not require any laboratory diagnosis. And for gonococcal infections, notification by phone in 24 hours is not required, but a written notification in 1 week is a must. And laboratory confirmation is also required, and notification by clinical diagnosis is not allowed, while diagnosis status required a laboratory diagnosis. And lastly is leprosy. So for leprosy, there's no need for a notification by phone in 24 hours, but a written notification must be given in 1 week. While laboratory confirmation is required, and notification cannot be made by clinical diagnosis alone, and diagnosis status must require a laboratory diagnosis. Next.
So for other notifiable disease, we have viral hepatitis, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, acute viral hepatitis C, D, and E, acute encephalitis, Japanese encephalitis, malaria, measles, pertussis, plaque, poliomyelitis, rabies, and relapsing fever. So the urgency of reporting is divided. A few highly dangerous diseases like plaque, rabies, and poliomyelitis required immediate notification by phone within 24 hours, whereas most others, including various types of viral hepatitis and malaria, require a formal written notification within 1 week. Regarding diagnosis, a laboratory confirmation is required for nearly every disease listed, providing the necessary evidence for epidemiology tracking, except for measles. Finally, while all diseases are reportable via confirmed laboratory diagnosis, Several conditions like pertussis and acute Japanese encephalitis can also be initially reported based on a clinical diagnosis. Next.
Moving on, we will go to salmonellosis, syphilis, tetanus, tuberculosis, typhoid, paratyphoid fever, and also typhus. So these are lists of notifiable disease in Malaysia, where it only requires written notification within 1 week. For yellow fever, it requires notification by phone within 24 hours. So for all the listed diseases, only tetanus is not required for lab confirmation, as tetanus is relying on clinical examination because there is no reliable lab test to confirm the disease. So that is all for our presentation on notifiable disease by Group 1 and Group 2. Thank you.